Arav had always been the type of person who believed in the power of visibility. In the fast-paced world of business, where presence on social media and constant networking seemed like the only path to success, he had made a name for himself by always being in the spotlight. Whether it was speaking at conferences, attending meetings, or posting about his latest ventures online, he had managed to keep himself front and center. It wasn't just his career that demanded his presence. It was his life. The more visible he became, the more successful his business seemed to grow. Or so he thought. But beneath the surface, the cracks were starting to show. The constant pressure of being constantly present, always on call, always in the public eye, was starting to wear him down. Arav found himself trapped in a cycle of overwork, exhaustion, and endless expectation. His friends had started to notice how little time he had for them, and his family had begun to ask why he no longer seemed like the same person they once knew. The toll it was taking on him emotionally was becoming undeniable. He had sacrificed so much to be seen. But now, in his moment of clarity, he realized something important. Maybe being everywhere all the time wasn't the key to success. The breaking point came one late evening, when Arav sat in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. He had just returned from another tiring event, giving yet another speech about entrepreneurship. He was well respected in the business world, but his personal life was in tatters. The exhaustion was taking its toll, and he could feel his mental and physical health slipping away from him. Arav had always been someone who thrived on challenges, but this endless grind felt like something he couldn't conquer anymore. That night, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to step away. At first, it felt like a drastic move. He had built his brand around being visible, around always showing up, always being available. He had spent years cultivating a presence that people admired and respected. But now he saw the truth. He had become a prisoner of his own success. And in that moment of realization, Arav knew he had to disappear, at least for a while. The idea of stepping back, of giving himself the space to breathe, felt foreign to him, but something deep inside told him it was exactly what he needed. The decision wasn't easy. He was used to being the one people came to for advice, the one who was always available for meetings, the one whose name appeared in every article, every business podcast. But now he was going to turn it all off, at least for a little while. He would delegate tasks to his trusted team, let them take the reins, and give himself the time and space to focus on what mattered most. He wasn't abandoning his business. He was just stepping back. He believed that by doing so he would discover a new kind of power. A power born not from being seen, but from the mysterious strength of absence. The first few days were the hardest. Arav felt disconnected from the world around him. He didn't know what to do with himself. Without his usual routine of meetings, emails, and social media updates, there was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. His team, who had always relied on his presence, seemed uncertain at first. They had questions, ideas, and fears, but Arav remained firm in his decision. He knew that the best thing he could do for himself, and for his company, was to trust his team and give them the autonomy they needed to grow. He had to show them that they could succeed without him constantly hovering over them. Weeks passed, and something unexpected began to happen. At first, the business seemed to slow down without Arav's constant presence. But then, a strange thing occurred. People started to take notice. His absence created an air of mystery around his company. The media, which had once been quick to cover every move Arav made, now seemed intrigued by his disappearance. Investors who had once been hesitant to engage with him because they saw him as a flashy entrepreneur began to see him in a different light. His absence had done something powerful. It had created curiosity. People wanted to know what he was up to, what his next move would be, and why he was no longer front and center. Arav's decision to disappear had done something he hadn't anticipated. It had made him more valuable. The less he appeared in the public eye, the more people wanted to know about him. His company's brand, once seen as loud and brash, now felt refined and mysterious. The value of scarcity was becoming clear to him. The more he pulled away, the more people were drawn to him. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about when and how you chose to show up. And by stepping back, Arav had learned the most important lesson of all: true power wasn't about being everywhere. It was about knowing when to be seen and when to disappear. At the same time, Arav's team was thriving. Without his constant presence to guide them, they had begun to step up in ways he hadn't expected. His decision to trust them had paid off. They were more autonomous, more confident, and more capable than he had imagined. They had learned to rely on their own skills and judgment, and in doing so, they had grown stronger. Arav had given them the space to take ownership of the business, and in return, they had proved that they were more than capable of handling it on their own. By the time Arav returned to the business world, he had transformed. He no longer felt the need to be everywhere or do everything. His company, now stronger than ever, was running smoothly without him constantly in the mix. The power of his absence had worked its magic. Arav's presence was now more powerful than ever, not because he was everywhere, but because he had learned the value of stepping back and letting others shine. Arav had discovered a new way to lead, a way that didn't rely on constant visibility or control. He had learned that sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do was disappear. And in doing so, he had not only found success but had also found peace. Arav's return to the business world was nothing short of transformative. When he first stepped back into the office, everything felt different. There was a renewed energy in the air, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. His team, now more confident and capable, greeted him with a mixture of excitement and respect. They no longer saw him as the person who had to be present at every meeting, making every decision. Instead, they saw him as a leader who had given them the freedom to grow and succeed on their own terms. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the way Arav had reshaped the entire culture of the company. It wasn't long before Arav realized that the company was thriving without him at the helm every moment. The decisions that his team made in his absence had been innovative and bold. They had taken risks that he wouldn't have allowed had he been constantly in the mix. The absence of his presence had opened up a space for others to take ownership, and as a result, they had exceeded his expectations. The business was flourishing, and the team was functioning more cohesively than ever before. But the deeper change wasn't just in the business, it was in Arav himself. He had always been driven by the desire to be seen, to be admired for his hustle and success. The recognition had fed his ego, giving him a sense of validation. Yet as he stepped back and allowed others to shine, Arav began to experience a shift in his own identity. His worth was no longer tied to his visibility. It was tied to something much more profound: the value he brought to those around him, the trust he had instilled in his team, and the peace he had found by embracing absence. It was during this time that Arav began to truly reflect on his personal life, which had been overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of success. His relationships with friends and family had suffered over the years, and he had realized that while he had built a successful career, he had neglected the people who mattered most. As much as his business had grown, his emotional connections had withered. Arav began to make amends, slowly rebuilding the relationships that had once been his foundation. He started spending more time with his parents, who had often felt like strangers in his busy life. They had always supported his ambitions, but even they had begun to question whether the success was worth the cost. His friends too had begun to reconnect with him, their calls no longer ignored, their invitations accepted with genuine interest. It was through these small acts of reconnection that Arav realized just how much he had missed. The world he had created for himself, full of meetings and deadlines, had been a distraction from the love and support that had always been right in front of him. The newfound balance in Arav's life allowed him to see the world differently. His perception of success began to shift. Success was no longer defined by how much money he made, how many people followed him on social media, or how many events he attended. True success, he realized, was about the quality of relationships, the ability to lead with integrity, and the courage to step back when necessary. As the months passed, Arav found himself at peace in ways he had never imagined possible. The once overwhelming pressure to always be present, always be visible, had lifted. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. His legacy was no longer tied to his constant presence in the spotlight. It was tied to the choices he had made, the relationships he had nurtured, and the way he had allowed others to lead in his absence. His business continued to thrive, but now it was in a way that felt more sustainable and fulfilling. His team, empowered by the trust he had placed in them, continued to innovate and grow. Arav no longer felt the need to hover over them. Instead, he found joy in watching them succeed on their own. And in this newfound peace, he realized that the true power of leadership lay not in control, but in knowing when to step back and allow others to rise. This shift in his mindset extended beyond just his business. Arav began to apply the same principles to his personal life. He stopped worrying about the expectations of others, stopped seeking validation from external sources. He embraced the quiet moments, the ones that didn't require constant attention or approval. In those moments of solitude, Arav found clarity. He realized that he had spent so much time chasing success that he had forgotten to live. Now he was ready to live on his own terms. In the quiet mornings, Arav would sit by the window of his office, sipping coffee and watching the world outside. He no longer felt the need to rush, to check his phone for the latest emails, or to plan his next big move. Instead, he embraced the stillness, knowing that success would come in its own time, at its own pace. The pressure to perform, to constantly prove himself, had melted away, leaving space for creativity, for inspiration, and for peace. Arav's journey had taught him something invaluable. True strength lies in the ability to disappear. By stepping away from the spotlight, he had found his true power, and in doing so, he had unlocked a version of himself that was more fulfilled, more connected, and more at peace than he had ever been before. As Arav embraced his new way of living, the world around him continued to evolve. The business, once dependent on his constant presence and decision-making, had taken on a life of its own. His absence had created space for creativity and innovation to flourish. The team members who had once been hesitant to step up now found themselves leading projects with confidence, each one contributing in ways Arav never anticipated. The power of autonomy had transformed them, and the results spoke for themselves. New ideas emerged from unexpected places, and the company's growth was now driven by the collective effort of a team that had learned to trust their own instincts. Arav observed this transformation from a distance, content with the progress but not completely satisfied. There was still something missing. While his professional life was in a more balanced state, his personal life was still in flux. The relationships he had worked to rebuild were stronger, but they needed time to fully heal. He realized that his absence had created a rift in his connections with his closest loved ones. Though he had made efforts to reconnect, the emotional distance that had built up over the years wasn't something that could be mended overnight. He needed to make more time for those who mattered the most. Arav started by spending weekends with his parents, taking them out to their favorite restaurants, and engaging in long conversations that stretched into the evening. His mother, who had always been the emotional anchor of the family, would smile knowingly when Arav mentioned his new way of thinking. She had seen him go through phases of relentless ambition, and felt the weight of those choices. But now, she could see the peace in his eyes, the calmness that had replaced the frantic drive he had once lived by. Arav also made time for his old friends, the ones who had stood by him even when his focus had shifted solely to his career. He had spent so many years ignoring them, convincing himself that the next big deal or project would bring him happiness. But now, as he reconnected with them, he realized that true happiness wasn't something to be achieved, it was something to be shared. He began hosting small gatherings at his home, inviting friends over for dinner and laughter. He let go of the pressure to impress, allowing himself to simply enjoy the company of those who had always been there. Yet, despite the newfound sense of peace in his personal life, Arav couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The business, his relationships, his personal growth, everything seemed aligned, yet he still felt incomplete. He had everything he had worked for, but still, there was a lingering emptiness. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he needed to confront it. The breakthrough came one evening, when Arav took a walk through the city alone. He had always been surrounded by people, colleagues, clients, friends, yet in that moment, walking through the quiet streets, he felt a deep sense of solitude. The city that had once been a symbol of his hustle and success, now seemed distant, as if he had outgrown it. As he walked, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the years he had spent chasing something outside of himself, something external. And in that moment, he realized that what he had been missing all along wasn't something he could achieve through work, fame, or relationships. It was a sense of purpose beyond the material world, a deeper calling that he had ignored in his pursuit of success. Arav didn't know exactly what this new purpose would look like, but he was determined to find it. He returned to his apartment that night, and began to search for answers within himself. The next few weeks were filled with introspection. Arav began reading books on philosophy, spirituality, and mindfulness. He attended seminars on personal growth and development, not because he needed to learn more strategies for success, but because he wanted to understand the deeper meaning of life. Through this journey, Arav discovered a side of himself he had long neglected. He realized that the true measure of success wasn't in how much he had achieved, but in how much he had given to others. He had spent so much time focusing on what he could gain, that he had forgotten about the impact he could make on those around him. Arav began to shift his focus from personal gain to collective good. He started using his business resources to support causes he cared about, such as education and mental health. He spoke at events not just about business, but about finding meaning and purpose in life. His passion for entrepreneurship was now combined with a desire to create a legacy that was about more than just profits. It was about making a difference in the world. As he shifted his focus, Arav found a new kind of fulfillment. It wasn't the kind that came from being seen or admired. It was the kind that came from knowing he was contributing to something greater than himself. His company continued to thrive, but now it was in a way that felt more aligned with his values. His team, still empowered by the trust he had placed in them, felt inspired by his newfound sense of purpose. They began to embrace the idea that success wasn't just about growing a business, it was about using their platform to create positive change. This new direction brought a sense of peace and satisfaction that Arav had never known. He no longer felt the need to prove himself, no longer felt the pressure to always be visible. He had found a purpose that was bigger than his career, bigger than his personal desires. And in that he found the true meaning of success. Arav had spent years chasing success in the wrong places, but in the end he had discovered that the most fulfilling success of all was the one that came from within. He had learned that the power of absence was not just about stepping away from the world, but about stepping into the world with a deeper sense of purpose. And in doing so he had found not just success but peace, fulfillment, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. Months passed, and Arav's life began to settle into a new rhythm. His business continued to prosper, but now it was evident that the foundation of his success was not merely the product of hard work or relentless ambition. It was the product of a deeper understanding, an understanding that true leadership didn't come from constantly being in control, but from empowering others and nurturing a sense of purpose. With his personal life growing richer, and his professional life flourishing in a more sustainable way, Arav felt that he was finally living in alignment with his values. The work that once felt like an endless race had transformed into a meaningful journey, where success was defined not by speed or outward achievements, but by the impact he had on others and the lives he touched. Despite this new sense of contentment, Arav still felt a nagging restlessness deep within. It wasn't that he wasn't happy, he was. It wasn't that he hadn't accomplished what he set out to do, he had. But there was a part of him that knew there was more, something deeper that he hadn't yet uncovered. He couldn't ignore the urge to push even further, to explore beyond what he knew. This desire led him to take a sabbatical from work. With his company in the hands of trusted leaders, he stepped away from the fast-paced world of business and set out on a journey of exploration. The decision wasn't based on a need to escape, but rather on a longing to grow in ways that went beyond the confines of his career. Arav traveled to remote places, quiet villages in the mountains, ancient towns by the sea, and even spent time in secluded ashrams in India. His travels weren't just about experiencing new cultures or seeing the world. They were about looking within. He meditated, spent time with wise elders, and listened to the stories of those whose lives were lived on simpler terms. Through these encounters, Arav learned that fulfillment wasn't just about finding success in the world, it was about finding harmony with oneself and the universe. During this time, Arav discovered a profound truth: the external world could never truly satisfy an internal void. No matter how much he achieved in his career, no matter how much love or recognition he received, true peace came from an acceptance of life as it was, and a surrendering to the flow of the universe. In the stillness of the mountains, he began to shed the layers of identity he had built over the years. No longer was he Arav the entrepreneur, the businessman, the leader. He was simply a soul on a journey, seeking connection, understanding, and meaning. It was during this time in a small Himalayan village that Arav met a group of spiritual seekers who would change his life forever. They were a diverse group. Some were wealthy individuals looking for answers. Others were humble travelers who had walked away from successful careers in search of something deeper. They taught Arav the art of letting go of attachment to success, recognition, and even relationships. They spoke of the importance of being present in the moment, and how true happiness could only be found by embracing the ebb and flow of life. Arav began to immerse himself in these teachings, not as a student trying to learn something new, but as someone willing to unlearn everything he thought he knew. He realized that his entire life had been driven by the desire to control his destiny, control his career, control his image. But true freedom, he discovered, lay in surrendering control and accepting life as it unfolded. As the days turned into weeks, and then months, Arav's transformation deepened. He began to understand the impermanence of everything: relationships, success, even the body itself. He embraced the idea that everything in life was temporary, and that it was our attachments to these fleeting things that caused suffering. It wasn't the loss of success, love, or recognition that caused pain. It was the clinging to them as if they were permanent. When Arav finally returned to the city, he was a different person. He no longer had the intense drive that once defined him. He had released the need to constantly prove himself, to achieve more, to be seen. Instead, he focused on the present moment, the relationships he had cultivated, and the work he could do to make a lasting impact without the need for validation. His company had continued to thrive in his absence, and he found joy in knowing that it no longer needed him to be constantly present for it to succeed. The shift in Arav's outlook on life was also evident in his personal relationships. He was no longer the aloof businessman who only showed up when it was convenient for him. Instead, he became someone who showed up for others, who was present in their lives, listening, caring, and offering support without the need for anything in return. His relationships with his parents grew even deeper, and he began to build new connections based on authenticity, not obligation. His friendships too transformed. The friends who had once been a part of his fast-paced life now found that Arav was someone they could lean on, someone who offered wisdom and calm in times of uncertainty. Arav no longer tried to impress or compete with them. He simply enjoyed their company, knowing that the most valuable moments were the ones shared in quiet understanding. Arav's transformation wasn't just about letting go of his business or his personal identity. It was about embracing the fullness of life, both the joy and the sorrow. He had come to understand that it wasn't about escaping the pain or seeking constant pleasure, but about finding peace in the midst of both. He had learned to dance with the rhythm of life, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust that everything would unfold as it was meant to. In the quiet moments, Arav felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was no longer chasing something outside of himself. He had found peace within, and in that peace, he found everything he had ever needed. He was free from the pressure to constantly achieve, to be seen, to be admired. And in that freedom, he found a profound sense of purpose. Erev had learned the most important lesson of all, that true success was not found in the pursuit of wealth, recognition, or even happiness, but in the surrender to life itself. In letting go, he had found the greatest peace of all. Erev had been back in the city for several months now, but there was a growing sense of peace within him that had never existed before. The frenetic pace that had once ruled his life now seemed like a distant memory. His mornings were calm and reflective, spent in quiet contemplation, or walking through the serene parks of the city. His evenings, instead of business meetings or events, were filled with laughter and meaningful conversations with friends, family, and those who had become part of his life during his journey. One evening, as Erev sat in his favorite cafe, sipping his chai, and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, he couldn't help but reflect on the last few years of his life. He thought about his rise to success, his struggles, his achievements, and most significantly, his moment of realization, the awakening that had led him to this place of serenity. He had once lived in a constant state of striving, always pushing for more, but now, he understood that life didn't need to be a race. It was about the experience, the moments, and the connections. As he sat there, enjoying the simple beauty of the moment, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Mira, a childhood friend who had always been part of his life, though from a distance. She had heard about his journey and transformation, and now, seeing him so changed, she couldn't help but feel both curious and intrigued. Mira was the kind of person who had always sought out new experiences and embraced change with open arms. She was the complete opposite of Erev's old self. She was free-spirited, spontaneous, and always in search of something deeper. Their paths had diverged for years, but Erev couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth and familiarity when he saw her. There was something about her presence that felt like home. "Mind if I join you?" Mira asked with a smile, her eyes lighting up with curiosity. Erev gestured to the seat across from him. "Of course, Mira. I was just lost in thought." As she sat down, Erev could see that she had changed too. The carefree energy that had once defined her had deepened, much like his own transformation. They were both different people now, shaped by their own experiences and growth. "So, how's everything going with the business?" Mira asked, her voice filled with genuine interest. Erev leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It's doing well, but honestly, I don't focus on it the way I used to. I've realized that success isn't about how much you achieve, it's about how much you give, how much you learn, and how you grow. The business is in good hands now. It's more about the impact it creates, not just the numbers." Mira nodded, clearly impressed by Erev's words. "I can see that. You've always been someone who aimed for success, but now, there's something different about you. It's like you've found a deeper purpose." Erev smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the peace he had cultivated within himself. "I have. I realized that I was always chasing something, chasing success, validation, recognition, but what I was missing was peace. And when I finally let go of the need to control everything, to constantly prove myself, I found peace. And with that peace, I found clarity. I don't need to chase anymore." Mira took a moment to absorb his words. She had known Erev for years, but hearing him speak now felt different. It was as if the version of him she had once known was gone, replaced by someone who had embraced life in its purest form. "So what's next for you?" Mira asked, her tone reflective. Erev paused before answering. He had never truly planned for the future in the way that most people did. He had always believed that life was something to be controlled, mapped out and mastered. But now, he was open to whatever came next. He had no expectations, no desires driving him. He was simply living, experiencing, and evolving with each passing day. "I don't know," Erev said with a sense of calm surrender, "but I think that's the beauty of it. I'm not concerned with what comes next. I trust that life will unfold as it's meant to. I'm focused on being present, on being mindful of every moment, and on continuing to learn and grow. That's all I can do." Mira smiled, clearly moved by his words. "You've really changed, Arav, and I think that's something beautiful. I always admired your ambition, but now, I admire your wisdom." Arav chuckled softly. "I think I've learned that wisdom doesn't come from ambition, it comes from experience, and from knowing when to let go." The two of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each reflecting on their own journey, and the connection they still shared, despite the years and the changes that had come between them. They both understood now that life wasn't about finding all the answers, but about living with the questions and embracing the uncertainty that came with it. As the evening grew darker, and the lights of the city flickered on, Arav and Mira continued to talk, sharing stories of their lives and experiences. For Arav, it was a reminder that relationships too could evolve and deepen. Mira had always been someone who had been a constant presence in his life, and even though they had drifted apart for years, their connection was still there, grounded in a shared understanding of life's complexities. Before they parted ways that evening, Mira leaned in with a smile. "You've inspired me, Arav. I think I need to let go of some of the things that are holding me back, just like you did." Arav gave her a warm smile. "Sometimes, we just need to trust ourselves and the journey. We don't need all the answers, just the courage to keep moving forward." With that, Mira hugged him tightly, and they parted ways, both knowing that their paths would continue to intertwine in unexpected ways. Arav watched her walk away, his heart filled with gratitude. His life had taken many twists and turns, but each one had brought him closer to the person he was meant to be. He had learned that true peace wasn't something that could be earned, but something that could only be experienced when one was willing to surrender to the flow of life. As he sat there, alone with his thoughts once again, Arav realized that he had come full circle. The ambitious young man who had once sought validation and success was no more. In his place stood a man who had found peace within himself, a man who no longer felt the need to chase after something outside of himself. He had found what he was looking for all along, a life of purpose, balance and serenity.